Okay. Yes, we're recording. Hi, Janie.
Hi, David. How are you?
Okay. Yeah, Ben, we already got you. Ben left again.
David.
Oh, yes.
Book. It's amazing.
I have my request in my local library system. It will reach me.
You will love it.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. I haven't quite finished, but it's really quite gripping.
Yep. Okay. I thought we might start with something that I alluded to a few weeks ago and didn't follow up on yet, having to do with generations in the workplace. I thought to start with, I wonder if anybody would like to comment on the difference they've experienced between boomer bosses and Xer bosses, if in fact they have. Or any other generation you might want to mention, since some of us have been working for quite a while.
Sure, I'll comment. I'll say that boomer bosses that I've had have tended to be maybe a bit vain, and they live on praise, but they can also be easily sort of social engineered. If you just give them the praise they want and talk them up, they're happy. Whereas the Gen X bosses are about results, and they're easier to work with when there's a problem, because what they really love, which any really good manager should love, is honesty and being willing to speak about what's going wrong, because that's the only way it'll ever get fixed. So with the Gen X boss, you tell them this is what's going on and this is what needs to be done.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, John Stark. Chaz has been reacting very visibly, as some of you may have noticed, and let's turn to him.
The trick with the boomer boss is to manage to convince them that your idea is their idea. That is the trick with the boomer boss, to convince them that they came up with the idea that you first came up with. That's the only way you can really convince a boomer boss of anything. Otherwise, they will do what they think is best and disregard anything you bring to the table. Gen X, they just do what works. And they're a bit more of a taskmaster, and much more, they want the results and they want it now or yesterday. And the more extreme versions of them can be harder taskmasters and sacrifice everything for efficiency. The better or more easier going Xer bosses recognize that you need a bit of give and take in order to get to that efficiency.
Okay, very interesting. Michael, were you? No, okay. Hello, Tamara. We're talking about different bosses from different generations, mainly boomers and Xers, but feel free to throw anything in yourself. They're not. Yes, Jocelyn, please.
Yeah, I don't think I've had very many Xer bosses, but just a general comment. It seems that the boomer bosses I've had or peers don't seem as interested in or don't care about the work-life balance as much as the Xers do. They're workaholics to a large extent. They're driven. So yeah, I would say that there's that element of having to struggle when you're talking about, needing whatever concessions for personal life.
Okay. Janie.
Okay. Not that I have experience with bosses, but it was rather serving constituents or, providing public services to different generations. And in the 80s, when most of the population were my own age, were young boomers, there was a sense of we needed to deal with the common good, and you could go into a meeting and where you had to make difficult decisions with school budgets, with who you were hiring, who you were serving, and we needed to think about what was the service that we were providing and making sure that everybody was benefiting. As the generations, as more Gen X parents became the, you know, the power source for who you were serving, the just-in-time support system, which is sort of now with COVID, we're all seeing, but obviously data-driven decision-making, which we all said was very important, but you know, you wanted it right then, right now. And the interesting change that I became very aware of is still as a public institution where we had to serve all children, culture, race, income, what have you, and we had to be able to get the money to do that. I couldn't go into a meeting of Gen X parents and say, you know, remember, we're a public institution, we're here to serve all children, welcome all parents, you know, regardless of whatever. What I would instead have to do, particularly if I was in a community of very wealthy parents, because I had both wealthy and poor and all the rest of it, I would say, I am so glad that you keep our feet to the fire, that you demand much for your children, you efficiency and data. And I said, that's really important, because the more you push on this very large institution, it helps us to serve all the children better. So instead of asking people to upfront sacrifice for the common good, I had to compliment people for their incredible push and data-driven decision-making, because it was the only way that I could get the buy-in to serve the less wealthy, higher needs children who were very much a part of the institution. But that was an amazing change that occurred probably within about 6, 7, 8, 9 months. And it worked.
Wow.
But it was very noticeable. So anyway, that was just in serving different generations.
Okay. Anybody else? Thinking about my department, I was brought into it in 1990 by a very determined boomer who had big plans for the department and wanted to put them in place, which involved a lot of recruiting. And he's still a very good friend of mine. Unfortunately, although he's a boomer, he wouldn't have been totally out of place among the characters in The Big Short. And he had an abrasive relationship with the higher ups, and therefore he didn't last very long after I got there, although he had done most of what he wanted to do. Now, he was replaced by a silent who ran the department for about 9 years, and who was absolutely wonderful, particularly because he protected all his boomer staff from what was going on. Then he was dumped by the administration for reasons of their own, and he was replaced by a succession of 3 other boomers, each in their own way were disastrous. So that was somewhat unfortunate, and I'm now informed that they have an extra chairman who's doing very, very well. So everybody is glad that that's all over. Okay, no more comments about that. Oh yes, Tamara, please. Yes.
Well, I had two boomer bosses, one of whom was when I was younger, and so was he, and he broke all sorts of rules, including having an affair with one of the staff members, and very seductive, etc., and misusing his power. And then my second boomer boss, which I had later in life, and I had her for 18 years, and she was absolutely workaholic and driven, and also abrasive, but just, you know, like this. I mean, the idea of work-life balance was wasn't even a concept she understood. So the age of those two and me, you know, is different. And I think in terms of what we read about the shift in the boomers, kind of was, reflected in those two bosses.
Right. Okay. Okay, now to another highly charged subject, with which I'm sure a number of people have had experience, millennials in the workplace. Any comments on that? Janie?
Okay, because our youngest employees in schools are now are pretty much millennials, young people coming in. Work-life balance is very important. They stand up for what's good for the family as a whole, and really take to task any kind of an institution that looks like the uber aggressive, overachieving long hours of the boomer generation. They really push back hard. And Bill wrote the various generations in the workplace, and that was one of the things that he said. The millennials really care about work-life balance, and huge shift. So, and I think they're right too.
Okay. Chaz?
I've had both a millennial supervisor and a millennial peers, obviously, worked with. Not only just the work-life balance, I'd say, they're also much more focused on, when you get them in the kind of supervisory role, creating a system that can self-perpetuate itself. Whether it's just getting certain tasks into a certain way of doing things, it's more focused on like getting systems in place so that way they can be automatic almost in terms of the way they run. Just to, that way it doesn't, you can just train someone, okay, this is how you do this operation, and you don't have to worry about any kind of, I don't want to say, just focusing on more systems like thinking. In terms of peers, work-life balance, as they put it, definitely. And I would also say a desire to not always be in the office, even before COVID-19. I would say there was a big criticism of Boomer, and I would separate Joneser, because Jonesers especially were the worst end of the Boomer generation to deal with.
You better define that, Chaz. We haven't used that term much.
Jonesers being the latter end of the baby boom generation, with a little bit of cusp into early Xers.
Yeah, yes, we
For
actually
those
have.
who aren't familiar.
We have about 3 of them here, actually. Right. Okay. 3 or 4.
Well, in any case, as I was saying, what was it? Yes, there was this whole culture of like always being in the office, even when you're in a job perhaps that may not be required to be as much, and oftentimes just assigning busy work that's really more of just like a time waster. Millennials would like to cut that out, cut the time wasting time to aid in getting that work-life balance, I would say. Just getting rid of time wasting.
Okay. Yes, Steve.
I will say that I love working with millennials because I find them to be very friendly and very diligent. And I think that the workplace, the white collar information technology workplace, as I've been in it for decades now, it has evolved into a much sort of calmer and friendlier place because of the millennial workforce coming in.
Okay.
When I was young, there was more of a sense that there was like all this competition and headbutting, and maybe not quite trusting everybody. But now everything goes more smoothly. And I will also say that millennials need structure. But when you give them that structure, when you give them processes and ways that they can check boxes and indicate that their work is done and understand what their responsibilities are specifically, then everything goes smoothly.
Okay.
So that could also be that I've aged, and so maybe I'm not butting heads with so many people because there are fewer and fewer people my age, and people are just sort of deferring to me. That could also be what it is.
I was going to say, in the theater world in which I work, they're all workaholics. Every range is workaholics when they're working. And that's just the way it is if you're going to make a living in this industry. And I don't see any difference in any layer of bosses. They're workaholics because if they're not, they will starve and have to go be computer people. And so they're going to work their butts off until they decide to leave the industry.
That's just the
And
nature
that's-
of theater in general. I would add on to what you said, Eileen.
Yeah.
Having gone to grad school and that, it's just the nature of the business. If you're not that, you're not in the business.
I mean, basically, what I always say to students is, you know, they ask me, do you think I can make it? Do you think I can make it? And I go, not unless you're driven. That's the only way you make it in this industry.
Yeah, right. Okay. It is commonly referred to as an industry now. That's very interesting to me. Okay.
Yeah, sure, it's an industry.
Okay. Yes, Tamara. Tamara, you're
Sorry, I
mute.
had
There you
to
go.
unmute.
Yeah.
I think this is an unpopular position. I have more experience with millennials as graduate students of mine than I do as workmates. But I found my students to become increasingly entitled as the years went on. So I'm not sure how that relates to the people you're describing. But that was my experience, that, you know, I should get an A, and if I don't, you better prove to me why I didn't. And how dare you expect this homework of me when I have to work full time and have kids, and you're just unreasonable to expect me to work for anything. And I got a lot of that attitude as years went on in my teaching career. So.
Okay, well, first I saw John nodding, and now I see Susan raising her hand. So, John, do you want to chime in there? Unmute. Yeah. I'll do it. No, you're still mute.
Okay, is that doing it?
Yes, you got
Okay,
it.
good. Yeah, no, I just, what Tamara said, I found students to be increasingly entitled, and at some indeterminate point, on 90s or something, they wanted study guides for exams, you know, written things. What was going to be, I said, well, you know, we've covered this material, you're going to be responsible for it. And they said, well, we need a study guide. So I wrote an outline, and I said, okay, and I basically just reiterated everything we just covered, and they said, well, this is everything. I said, yeah, that's it. But they really almost want the answers in advance. You know, there's this sense that you have to give rubrics is the word, and you have to set the criteria exactly as to what constitutes an A, what constitutes a B. And it's a sense of entitlement, really. It's very well put.
Okay, Susan.
No, I just wanted to add to that, and not from my own experience, but I hosted, meaning I sort of became a surrogate mother to, maybe a dozen international students in over a 10-year period, and I kept hearing them. They were horrified. Because in their own countries, in their own cultures, you know, the sense of entitlement just doesn't, you know, it doesn't exist. There are other issues, but they were horrified by the sense of entitlement of their student sister, in this case, a women's college, and not only, you know, echoing everything that's been said so far, but even to the point where, you know, professors' cell phone numbers were made available. They could be called, you know, morning, noon, and night into the, you know, waking them up. I mean, it was quite astonishing to me to, you know, to hear this, because it's so completely far from anything that you know, that existed when I was on that campus.
Okay, thank you. Janie, yes.
Okay, the millennials in 2000, the graduating high school class, that was the first graduating class of millennials, and that was Bill published Millennials Rising. Throughout the 90s, those of us who were educating the children, we, for better or for worse, you know, all of the standards-based learning, the study guides, you know, the pacing guides the teachers were required to, in fact, do all of this stuff, and teachers still are not happy with the state promulgated pacing guides. And we had huge fights over grading and exactly what, you know, it was just from the 90s on, for that 10-year period, state standards, county standards, political, whatever it was, efficiency, data driven, and your classrooms were set in a certain way, the curriculum was developed in a certain way. And we did it to the kids. And that was when they went on to you all who were, you know, professors in colleges. For better or for worse, that was how your K-12 systems were beginning to be run. And a lot of it was, you know, it was driven by standards, not only locally and parents wanting it and the government wanting it and the states wanting it. So we passed them on to you at the university with these kids, whether they were entitled or not. They were used to a certain way of learning and arguing over grades and wanting to have the study guide and what are we going to be tested on? Because we were testing them all the time before they got to the college or the university level. So
Yeah, I mean, they were kind of mass produced, which is
Yes,
very
they
much the way
were.
the GIs were.
that's right.
And I found in my brief experience teaching them in college that they really want to know where they stand. And actually, this had gotten into the administration too, that you had to give a lot of short assignments during the term, which in the tradition I was in, the university tradition, was kind of Mickey Mouse. And, you know, you told the students what they had to do when it was up to them to do it. And a lot wrote in the final exam and so on, but that was out. Now.
At the K-12 level, it got to the point, and they still are, the millennials are beginning to push back on it. You had to have so many grades in the grade book in
Yes,
order to
right.
justify the grade. And now that when we've got now with all the software programs, the parents have access to the daily grade books of kids. And you talk about helicopter parenting and parenting wanting to know exactly what happened today and what were the objectives of the lesson today. You show me, put that in your email and all the rest of the stuff. So that continued, you know, sort of micro view as to learning on a daily basis. And now with the COVID situation and everybody's, you know, all the big systems are all going to open online. It's even more, except that now the parents have discovered that this is really hard work and maybe this isn't right.
Okay. Yeah, Tamara. Tamara.
Just unmuting. The other thing I noticed more and more, and I think we're seeing it full blown out now on the campuses, was just incredible sensitivity. Now, I taught social work, so I'm sure I got more of it than maybe some of you who may have taught other subjects, but oh my gosh, the way that teacher looked at me was shaming, you know, and that's just not okay. And, you know, that kind of demand of, you know, protecting their feelings and not offending anybody and all that kind of stuff was definitely going on. I retired from teaching in 2010. So 10 years ago, you know, that was really rampant, you know, even before I retired, and seems to be more so now.
That's interesting because I was going to say that I think on campuses that is more, on some campuses anyway, that's more associated with Gen Z, who showed up about 5 years ago. But clearly, from what you were saying, it was somewhat present already. Yeah. Okay. Well, all right. I have one millennial in the workplace clip, which is a clip I'm very fond of. And it's from the movie I had originally thought we might use, but I changed my mind, Up in the Air. How many people have seen Up in the Air? About half. Okay. Up in the Air came out about 2010, and it starred George Clooney. And he is a star in a firm that makes its living going around the country to firms who are downsizing and firing people, which they have turned into a kind of an art and a science. And this has given him this particular lifestyle in which he's constantly traveling, et cetera, which is a lot of what the movie is about. And as I say, the movie came in about 2010. And at the beginning of the movie, he's just gotten back to the headquarters from a trip. And his boss informs him that there's going to be a change and that they're going to hear a presentation. And so here we go. Oh, do it again.
I'm thrilled that everyone's back under one roof. Welcome home, boys. I know there's been a lot of whispering about why we're here, so let me jump right in. Retailers are down 20%.
Can't see it.
Auto industry.
Oh boy. Wait a second. Oh, I know what happened. Yes. This is bizarre.
Is in the dump.
How about
Housing
now?
market doesn't have a heart.
No.
I'm thrilled that everyone's back under one roof. Welcome home, boys.
Wait.
I know there's been a lot of whispering about why we're here, so let me jump right in. Retailers are down 20%. Auto industry is in the dump.
Flash.
Housing
Flash
market.
for an instant.
Something is crazy because it keeps stopping the share.
Huh.
It doesn't appear that the share stopped.
All right.
I'm thrilled that everyone's back
that?
under one roof. Welcome home, boys. I know there's been a lot of whispering
You
about
got
why
it?
we're here,
So
so
what
let me
we
jump right
see
in.
is
Retailers
your file structure with the different
Right.
thumbnails.
Okay. I don't understand why. All right. Just a second. Okay. So now you see the file structure, right? So now we'll open it up again. What do you see now?
I'm thrilled that everyone's back under one roof. Welcome home, boys. I know there's been a lot of whispering about why we're here,
You
so
have
let
two
me jump right
screens.
in. Retailers are down
Oh,
20%.
maybe that's it. Okay. Wait a second.
You just
Okay. All right. So now we're not sharing. So now, oh. Okay. Oh, I think this is going to be all right. Okay.
Yay!
Auto industry is in the dump. Housing market doesn't have a heartbeat. It is one of the worst times on record for America. This is our moment. Now, last summer, we received a dynamite young woman here from Cornell, and she had some pretty big ideas that she challenged me with, and my first reaction was, who does this kid think that she is? But after I gave it a listen, she really knocked me out. So, with a peek into our future, Natalie Keener.
If there's one word I want to leave you with today, it's this.
Glocal.
Global. Our global must become local. This company keeps 23 people on the road at least 250 days a year. It's expensive and it's inefficient. When I came to Craig 3 months ago with this, he told me, and quite astutely, it's only a problem if you have a solution. Well, today I stand before you with just that. You all know Ned in reception. Today I'm gonna fire Ned. Sorry, Ned. I'm sure HR will hire you back this afternoon.
We'll see about that.
Now, Ned could be any employee in any one of our clients' locations worldwide. Strategy packets would be shipped in advance. Ned would be given a seat and find one of our transition specialists waiting for him. Mr. Laskin, the reason we're having this conversation is your position is no longer available.
I don't understand. I'm fired?
Hearing the words "you've been let go" is never easy. Change is always scary. But consider the following. Anybody who ever built an empire or changed the world sat where you are now. And it's because they sat there that they were able to do it.
My fucking line.
Well, what happens now?
This is the first step of a process that will end with you in a new job that fulfills you.
Yeah, but how does it work?
I want you to take the packet in front of you. Review it. All the answers you're looking for are inside. Start filling out the necessary information, and before you know it, you'll be on your way to new opportunities. Now, Ned, I need you to go back to your desk and start putting together your things. As a favor to me, I'd appreciate it if you didn't spread the news just yet. Panic doesn't help anyone.
I understand.
Give it up for Ned. You can start the morning in Boston, stop in Dallas over lunch, and finish the day in San Francisco. All for the price of a T1 line. Our inflated travel budget is eviscerated by 85%. And more importantly, to you guys on the road, no more Christmases in a hotel in Tulsa, no more hours lost to weather delays. You get to come home.
She believes in work-life balance. Okay, any comments on Natalie? Michael?
So I've seen this movie before.
Yeah.
I find the idea, and again, I am a boomer, I find the idea of someone being fired over Zoom to be appalling. And, I find that she has elevated efficiency over any level of, human connection that that George Clooney and the people of his ilk are able to muster in a sensitive situation, which is why they presumably get hired to do these things. So I was really, when I saw this movie, I was really struck by, just how clueless she seemed to be about what it was like, or so little that she had so little empathy for what people on the other end of that message would be going through.
Okay, Kevin.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that, but I do think, and I hadn't seen this movie before, but I'm sure I'll look it up now. She seems a little ahead of her time. I think, my particular company, I think, is not going to go back from many of the things we've done because of COVID. And that won't just be a matter of, convenience to employees or letting people stay home for Christmas instead of traveling. It's definitely going to be a bottom line calculation that we can divest ourselves of a lot of our infrastructure. We can, we've been able to do a bunch of things with people working from home that nobody had the courage really to try before now. And now that they've been forced to do it, they've been able to see that it kind of works. So I agree with everything Michael said about, the lack of human connection with something as important as losing a job. But I think it's coming, and if not already here.
Well, I have to say to Michael that while I'm not exactly disagreeing with what he said, watching the movie, the difference between doing it that way and the way they do it in person is not all that great. And the people don't feel that much better when it's done in person. But yes, it is an additional step. Okay, any other comments? Yes, Jude.
Well, the premise of the company is also destroyed by her big idea. That the company doesn't want to or have the ability to send people or ask its managers in far-flung locations to fire people because they don't want to you know, whatever, invite retaliation or whatever it is. But if the company itself can now use a two-dimensional firing system, the contractor is no longer necessary. George Clooney's company is no longer necessary because now they'll just two-dimensionally fire their own people. So this is something that, you know, a business consultant sees, which is how many times a company destroys itself by its big ideas.
Okay. Well, I'm not, that always struck me as a weakness of the movie. I'm not sure if there is such a company as that in the real world. And I would not be surprised if there was not. But, okay, Ben, and then Susan.
Well, I agree with Michael. I think the movie exhibited such an extraordinary lack of empathy of anybody for anybody else. And I think that's in large respect a characteristic of the age. One of the wonderful things about the quarantining and the closing of schools that's been caused by COVID-19 is that people have suddenly understood how important it is for children to be in a school classroom. All of the chatter that I'd heard for a long, long time about how I, as a school teacher, was going to be replaced by Khan Academy has vanished. And I think that's going to happen in other industries as well. Companies that think that they can have all of their employees out of the office all of the time are going to discover that they really want their employees in the office at least some of the time, or else they're going to lose any sense of team or program or common purpose.
Okay, Susan, I think next.
I guess I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, coming back to, I think what Jude was saying for a minute ago, the business, I think it was something to the effect of that the business consultant sees that they're basically going to self-destruct with this way of eliminating people in the workforce. Is that, do I have that right?
That's what I heard.
Yeah, okay. So my thought about that was that that young woman, you know, reminded me of having worked for 18 years in a large bank and, you know, seeing McKinsey parading in on, you know, every time we had a new CEO, we had McKinsey come in and give us a whole new, you know, program, a whole new vision, you know, a whole new 5-year plan, a whole new, you know, branding. I mean, it just every 5 years. And I swear McKinsey made a fortune, you know, in doing consulting for us. So I think it's not the business consultant, you know, seeing this, it's the business consultant coming in with those kinds of ideas. I worked in a division that was very, 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 probably one of the most people-oriented part of the bank. It was the trust department. And it just became increasingly difficult over those 18 years, and especially when the bank was bought by Fleet, which had a whole different culture and was very, very, you know, by the book, you know, cookie cutter kind of approach. So I have trouble, I guess, seeing all of this in terms of the generations, because I think that a lot is driven by, you know, these companies all have all different cultures, and they're not necessarily generation, you know, the result of a particular generation in the company. I don't know. I'm kind of I'm just thinking out loud now, so I don't have this very well thought through. But I was just responding to the comment about the consultant who struck me as being just one of these hotshot, sort of MBA, fresh out of the MBA program types who, was going to basically change the world, at least inside this company, and probably destroy it.
Well, I think, okay, she strikes me, the millennial aspect of her to me is, first of all, she's obviously been a very high achiever all her life. And she really wants to prove that she can have a new idea and put it through and so on. And all that is pretty typical because, like, okay, she's going to the Ivy League and there's almost no way to go to the Ivy League for most kids, unless you've been a total high achiever every minute of your life. I mean, it's really the only way. So her momentum is driving her forward. Okay, Janie and then Jude. Yeah.
Okay. Obviously, COVID-19 is a once in 100 years horrible crisis, spark of history, gate of history, and each generation with its own large mood or personality will learn or respond, in its own, will add to the resolution of COVID if we ever get to the end of it. And when we talk about millennials and work-life balance, and somebody else, I think it was Kevin, somebody had brought up, maybe it was Ben, the issue of all online learning we've all discovered is pretty sterile and concern for children for social emotional development, and the millennial parents are the ones who are beside themselves with the all online learning and the whole piece of it. So I think what will be interesting generationally, if we ever get saved from this horrible pandemic, what we all learn at the other end and what each generation sort of contributes in its experience with this, and what part of the assets, because every generation has its own assets, how that will help to change, because everybody says coming out the other end of it, there will be a change. We will be changed for this experience. And millennials, I think in the work-life balance and in their own concern for their own human relations, whatever it is, at the other end, that'll be interesting to see how they help recraft things. I think the vision of hoteling, the vision of workspaces, even last year, is everybody was in a big space and everybody had their earphones on, and there was no privacy. And I am already beginning to hear from some of the younger employees in these companies where they're all at home now and going, man, when we go back, I hope there is at least a little bit of privacy. Could we have just a little bit of, a change in how we're doing this? So anyway, a year from now, we can have the discussion of what each generation has learned or will provide or help change a year from now, which, by the way, Google is going to have all its employees stay home until July 2021.
Yeah. I think in higher education, there's going to be a lot of distance learning at various levels, which I don't think is a good thing, but I definitely think it's going to happen for various reasons.
Well, it's part of it is just economic.
I just want to say that in my industry is decimated right now.
Yes, I know.
So, we can't work until we can go in front of an audience. And what I'm observing in Philadelphia, and you can check American Theater this week to find what I posted in my journal last week, which is that the millennial generation is burning down Philadelphia theater right now. They really are. They're saying that anybody who leads a theater who's been artistic director for more than 10 years needs to be fired, because we need young voices in the theater now and get rid of the old people. And these are the people who founded these theater companies 20 and 30 years ago, who are being told they have to get out because they're not the voice of the present and they need to go. Right now, while we're all unemployed anyway, this is what's entertaining the Philadelphia listservs. And it's from the perspective of a generations class, I found it intriguing, to say the least, to watch what I consider the torching of American theater in Philadelphia right now, which is primarily white male run. And that's where it's coming from. It's get out. It's time for everybody else to get a chance. And interesting to watch if you're interested in watching the millennials rip down both Gen X and Boomers in one fell swoop right now.
Yeah.
It's playing
Well,
out.
My wife is a serious amateur theater person who's been involved in a lot of things around here, and she's certainly seen a lot of that.
Well,
And,
I helped
yeah.
run a big high school theater program, and we're
Right.
dead in the water right now. And kids are
Yeah,
just
right.
desperate and beside themselves, as are the teachers.
All right. Well, it's time to move on. There's one other thing I can't help mention though about that movie. I just loved Anna Kendrick in that movie, and I was so looking forward to seeing more of her. And she has been such a disappointment. And I don't know who was responsible or what happened, but somehow she was convinced that she has to smile all the time on camera now. And it really hasn't helped her acting at all. And I haven't seen her in anything where she was remotely as good as in that. But she's still pretty young, so maybe this can change. But she sure was tremendous in that. All right, onward to The Big Short. And the first question I want to ask, which I think would be an interesting question, is how did you feel about the main characters in the movie, the protagonists in the movie? Kevin.
Well, and I've said these kind of things in the past, and it makes me seem terribly naive and out of touch, I know, but I didn't find anybody particularly appealing as far as protagonists go. But I, certainly recognize that these are all the kinds of people that are out there. Some of these are people I work with. So, I took it for what it is. It's more reality, perhaps, more reality than perhaps I'm looking for when I see a film. But no, it was very interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Next. Yes, Steve.
I had a lot of sympathy for Steve Carell's character.
Okay.
Because it seemed like he had more sincerity about trying to do the right thing, and also because of his circumstances of his emotional trauma from his brother's suicide. But one thing I thought was really interesting, though, is that there are 4 guys. They're all Gen Xers. They're the guys who figured out The Big Short.
Yes.
They're all portrayed as kind of like they're the heroes for not thinking like everybody else. They didn't follow the herd. They were the mavericks, and they thought their own way. And because of that, they won. But that's actually exactly the kind of third-turning individualism that the movie is also trying to say is the whole problem. So there's kind of a paradox there, I thought.
Yeah, okay. You liked the Carol character more than the Christian Bale character.
Yeah, I thought that, I get that Bale was sort of portrayed as maybe kind of autistic, but then I thought maybe he was a little bit inconsiderate towards others, but then he got a pass for that because he was such a genius.
Okay. Others. Susan.
I'll something. I find, I mean, as I'm thinking about it, very mixed feelings about basically all of them, because bottom line, they all saw this problem developing. They all knew that people, a vast number of people are being taken advantage of. I mean, and we're going to be destroyed. I mean, but to the point where, I mean, when you went with Steve Carell and his crony were down in Florida, going door to door trying to find, the owners, and that really drove home the point. So at bottom line, I mean, this was a horrible problem that was being treated as just nothing more than a financial, an opportunity to make a lot of money. And that is a very difficult thing to swallow, I think. And it happened. But when you actually see it being portrayed, it's hard to swallow it. So in some ways, I liked Steve Carell because he struggled. He did struggle. I mean, he clearly had. It seemed to me he had one or two moments where he was feeling angst, but not for very long. And then also Christian Bale. I mean, for him, it was just a nothing but one big opportunity that was looming on the horizon a couple of years down the road, and he had the difficulty of standing his ground, which I give him credit for. But then it just comes back to what was this all about, and that in itself was horrible.
Janie, and then Judy.
Yeah, I think the only character that I sort of rooted for was the Mark guy, because he seemed to have some moral thoughts about whether or not this whole thing was right or not. But I agree with I think it was Susan. They were all just motivated by money and basically cheating as many in causing things to fall apart, and that nobody really cared as long as you could deal with these big numbers and sell these worthless bonds. And so what if somebody got hurt? They were all making gobs of money, and therefore it was okay. The only thing that it was interesting in the story where Mark finally didn't sell until the very end, and in the movie itself, I don't think anybody went to jail over all of the fraud and the bailouts.
Basically, no.
Yeah. I was going to say that's what I was telling David. Dark Towers, which is about Deutsche Bank and where people do go to jail, and but that really takes, that one goes up to I think 2018, whereas the movie we watched only went up to 2007, 2008. So,
Judy.
None of those people were cheating anybody. The banks were cheating everybody.
They weren't cheating. They were just very smart, and they developed these synthetic investments to help them make a fortune on the demise of the mortgage loan industry, which was inevitable because they saw that it was all going to fall apart. But you're right. I mean, it was the guys who were cheating were those brokers that Steve Carell met with, in the bar or wherever they were in Florida, who were like, what? Ask for financials, what? I mean, explain what an adjustable rate mortgage is. I mean, and laughing their heads off over it.
Yeah. John,
so
I'm sorry.
That was that to me was where I agree. That's where the cheating was.
John.
Yeah, it did say at the end that some of them went to jail. There was a thing at the end that showed, they gave the names and what happened to them, and some of them did go to jail.
One name was all in the movie.
That's all?
Yes.
No, see, that's unconscionable. I mean, I couldn't think of a punishment that would really fit this crime. The degree of it was absolutely so ominous, and how many people, their assets and savings were utterly destroyed by this. It's problem with capital punishment is you can only do it once.
Jude.
Serious.
It's funny because in the book, The Big Short, the climax is different. Yes, the guys who buy the short positions win, as they do in the movie, because the banks, as you see in the movie, that were creating investments to sell to their customers, even though they knew they were faulty, even though they knew they were built on sand. The book goes up to that, but then there's an additional revelation, and that is that the banks were long, all of them were long on the mortgage position.
Yeah.
They were long on the bonds, and And that's what brought down Merrill Lynch, was that they had bet on investments
Yes.
that they were laughing about selling, but they still had an enormous amount of in the portfolio. If you're creating fake investments and selling them all, it's a more sensible company you're running. It's not nice, it's evil, but at least it has an internal sort of sensibility to it. If you're holding the investments that you created and you're long in them, and in fact you have to buy the shorts just to offset some of your longs, it's even more ridiculous and it's even more absurd. And then the fact that they get bailed out, it just keeps adding one ridiculous climax on top of another. But I just felt that should be pointed out because, the movie goes in a certain direction to make heroes of 4 people, but the book goes further to make fools of 10,000 people.
Okay. Michael, you're being very quiet under the circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've now seen this movie multiple times, and each time I see this movie, I wonder, I think back to the first prosecution that was made really in the heat of the moment of the 2 Bear Stearns managers who were running the reserve fund. There was an effort almost immediately to set a precedent to prosecute 2 individuals who played a key role in the demise of Bear Stearns. And they were charged in the Southern District. There was a pretty energetic prosecution of them, and they were acquitted. And I think that scared off a lot of I think that cast a shadow over some prosecutions that might otherwise have occurred. If you couldn't get those 2 guys from Bear Stearns, and they couldn't, they tried and they couldn't, how are they going to make a more complicated case that involves so much systemic deception up and down the line that was motivated so largely by systemic greed? I think that's some of what went on. It's hard to believe that they couldn't have found somebody that they could have nailed for fraud, but as I say, I do think the experience with those 2 guys at the Bear Stearns Reserve Fund really did affect their willingness to charge people.
Okay. Judy, yeah.
I just have a question. I'm a librarian, so I don't know much about banks or finance or business for that matter. But I do understand the idea of fiduciary responsibility. And I don't understand how banks could get away, any bank, Bear Stearns or any of them, with what they did in terms of the responsibility of managing money that's given to you in good faith.
Michael.
Yeah. That's do you want to take that, Susan?
Go ahead. You're much more knowledgeable, but
Yeah.
I have some things to say.
Yeah. So first of all, the financial services institutions, the Bear Stearns, the Goldman Sachses, et cetera, have very complicated relationships with their customers and their stockholders. And on the one hand, they stand, they do not have a fiduciary duty towards their stockholders. They have a fiduciary duty to those for whom they are fiduciaries. And some of those, not everyone who purchases securities from them, so they do not have a fiduciary duty towards people who purchase and sell securities from them. Those people theoretically stand at arm's length to them and have the ability to protect themselves through diligence and through examination of securities. and could theoretically have done the exact work that Michael Burry did, that Dr. Burry did. You know, not done for these bond offerings, obviously, but done for stock offerings. For example, an initial public offering of common stock, there's a fairly extensive due diligence phase, much of which is a byproduct of stuff that happened in the late 1920s and 1930s, where people go out and look to see that the thing that the company whose shares are being sold actually has the stuff that, you know, that's being sold. There's a famous case involving bowling alleys where they went and looked to make sure that there were enough, that the company had the bowling alleys it claimed to have in the prospectus. And so that's why that's why the offering price on initial public offering is 7%. But for these bond offerings, I don't know what the standard of diligence was. I don't know whether they looked at how clearly they looked at the tape. I don't know how much they relied upon their financial models. And that's because I didn't, those weren't the kinds of offerings that I worked on. So I don't know how closely they looked at the tape and how closely they looked at the
Well, excuse me. Christian Bale proved that you could do that. I mean, that's what he did. He actually looked at what they were selling. Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, Susan.
Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm going to say, to sort of amplify a little bit on what Michael is saying, that the people who had the fiduciary responsibility were people like the California State Employee Fund Manager, who was shown in this film. I think it was California, who was wanting to invest in these bonds for for the employee fund. He's got the fiduciary responsibility to the fund to make sure that is it is in fact a AAA or whatever, type of investment, a really solid investment. So and I also want to say, just because I think I have a little bit of sensitivity to the subject, that we have to define what we mean by bank, because these were largely investment banks, and they were beholden to the Securities and Exchange Commission. It's a totally different ball of wax from banks like the First National Bank of Boston, which is where I started, which was under the supervision of the Comptroller of the Currency. So they had very, very different responsibilities to to the federal agencies. And a bank, the First National Bank of Boston at that time, could not engage in investment banking, could not put funds like this together. Whereas Goldman Sachs or Bear Stearns, all these investment banks, that was their bread and butter.
Okay, I want to move to the heart of the matter as I see it, although this has all been very interesting. What does it tell us about the state of America at that time that it was only these half dozen eccentric, some of them certainly on the spectrum, Gen Xers, who actually could figure this out and act on it?
Wait a minute. Well, what about Harry Markopolos?
Yes, he's a perfect example as well. I think this has come up. Harry Markopolos was also in the financial gang, and his boss, sometime in the late 90s, I think, said, "Hey, Harry, I want you to look into this guy Madoff, because you got to figure out what he's doing so that we can do it too, because he's getting all the business." And Harry, who actually had been in the Army Reserve, was in the Army Reserve, and he was kind of like these guys. I mean, he was a hardhead and a numbers guy, and according to him in his book, he spent about one day looking into it and walked back into his boss and said, "This is ridiculous. This is totally impossible. It's got to be a Ponzi scheme." And he spent a decade trying to get the SEC to do something about it, which he couldn't do. So he's another case, yes. So, but again, what does this tell us?
I'm afraid to think about that.
Well, I've had to think about it, but I'll get to that in a moment. Janie, yes.
Yeah, I think that as a society, people, I mean, there was such fascination with numbers, and you can do all kinds of cool things with numbers. And a lot of people don't understand how it worked, because obviously in the movie you had this, these outlier people that figured out this whole scheme, but that the rest of it's like the pension fund investment person. That was interesting to bring that up because it was his responsibility to figure this out, and they didn't do it. And enough people did not look at the number side of it, but believed it because these smart people seem to know numbers, and they're math people and tech people, and okay, we'll believe them and this must work. But it's like data-driven decision-making can fool you, and if you don't know what's going on, or you don't think to actually get to the bottom of it to see if the bowling alley exists, you can be fooled by it. And that's where data-driven decision-making leads you down a dark hole, and you can't blindly follow it.
Well, we had undone a lot of the regulation that would have made this impossible in earlier decades. But there's a tremendous herd instinct, and if everybody's doing it, we've got to do it too. That seems to be the thing, more than anything, I think, that kept this going.
But I think it was also going the herd with the numbers, because
yes, but the numbers are lies.
And because
which
complicated numbers on spreadsheets is nobody's going to look.
Right,
anyway.
right.
And you put on the table this beautifully produced perspective, and this must be just right because look what they showed us, without ever actually checking on it.
Right, Michael. Yes.
So the thing that I come back to are groupthink.
Yes.
So there's a tremendous amount of groupthink. There would have been a tremendous amount of social pressure to exclude anyone who was a contrarian. It was very obscure. You would have had to do a tremendous amount of digging. And it would not have been immediately obvious when the securities were produced, because they wouldn't have put non-performing mortgages into the securities when they were initially produced. You would have actually had to monitor the securities over the course of their lives to determine that they were non-performing. And there sort of was no obvious structure to do that, except that, guys like Jared Ventnor and Michael Burry, and they went around and they said, okay, we've noticed these weird things going on in the market, we'll do this. But so those are the factors that I'd like to point to as contributing to the situation.
Okay. Ben, yes, and then Jude, yeah.
2 years ago, I was at a dinner with a college senior who was a computer science major. And I asked him what he was going to be doing. And he said he was going to work for a company where he would do coding. And I asked him what the company did. And he was going to do coding to try to make computerized trading go faster. And maybe it was the wine I had for dinner, but I asked him, why is it good for computerized trading to go faster? And he had absolutely no understanding of the question. He said, well, it's an interesting computer science project. But the kid had utterly no moral center. He had no sense of ethical behavior or empathy for other people. It was an intellectual exercise that he was going to do without any thought of what its value to society would be. And I saw that again in this film.
Okay. Jude.
Okay, I bought some of these from Merrill Lynch, and over a period of years, the returns on them the contracts were short. They were like 6 months, and they would pay off, and the returns were more than you could get from a savings account. And most importantly, they were AAA rated. Don't forget, Moody's and Standard and Poor's. In the book, Steve Carell's character, the real guy, he figures out that, well, look, if Standard and Poor's wouldn't give them the AAA, they'd just go to Moody's and get it from them. But in the movie, a lady confesses, that if we didn't do it, they just go to Moody's. But it's a circular firing squad. Once there's a AAA rating on there, it's really the rating companies didn't do their job. But then again, what they're producing is just an opinion. So the legal basis for suing them goes away immediately. And therefore, now that the AAA rating stands, the legal basis for suing anybody goes away immediately. So the reason nobody was prosecuted is because Moody's and Standard & Poor's weren't prosecuted. Okay? So the whole reason I bought these was because of the AAA rating, and it had nothing to do with anything. The people who were supposed to do what Steve Carell did and what Michael Burry did didn't do their job and took the blame with them. And then from then on, everyone else was blameless. And remember, the guy who sold them to me was long in the bonds. Merrill Lynch, who he worked for, was long in the bonds.
Yep,
there was a cycle of belief there that as a regular, just ordinary person, okay, the groupthink is, I did my due diligence, I checked out the rating, and these guys are selling them because they own them.
Okay, Kevin, I'd like to step in for myself because we are starting to get short in time, and something I want to tell you all, which is I identify more with these guys than anybody else we've met in any of these movies. And that has to do with my own professional life, which some of you know a lot about, because my profession went crazy too, going back decades, and it's still crazy. And I like to think I was one of the ones who didn't go crazy, for which I got a lot of personal reward, but very little professional reward. And the other big reaction I have to the movie is that I'm just green with envy towards these guys. It has nothing to do with the money they made, because that's never been the motivation for me. And I've got all I need. It's because they got proven right. And that is something which, for a historian, it doesn't really happen, because it's all in the past and you don't run the experiment again and find out. But I also, it's ironic. Well, okay, I don't think I'm the sort of person they are. You can all have your own opinion about that, and I won't ask you what it is. But in a way, I'm a little envious of them too, because that real hard-edged, what War with the World persona, I think, is something that some people who are very, very smart get, because they've realized something that I never really got, which is that everybody's going to hate them for being this way, so they better hate them first, and before they can get hurt. And that's only a theory, and I can't prove it, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if that were true. But really, we live in a world where maybe it's always been this way, at least to a certain extent, but I think it's much worse. The people who can think for themselves, look at the numbers or the documents or whatever it is themselves, and reach their own conclusion are very unusual. And they better enjoy doing it, because they're not going to get a hell of a lot other reward. And that is where a lot of the power of the movie comes from for me. Particularly, of course, because in this case, there was so much at stake for the whole country and for the whole world. But there's a lot of this going on in many professions. And in fact, just to give you an example of something in the news, which is very much in my mind. Okay. At the beginning of the epidemic, I got sick for one night. Okay. And I didn't think much about that. but then, and I didn't have classic COVID symptoms, but I had fever. Then I talked to a friend of mine who had evidently had it, and her husband had gotten sick for one night. And I thought, gee, that's interesting. So I sort of decided, gee, I guess maybe I'll get an antibody test. So I was watching for it, and as soon as I could get one, I got it. And it was negative. And so I was kind of disappointed in that for reasons you can well imagine, so I put it out of my mind. Now this morning, there's a big story in the Times about antibody tests and how a lot of the ones that have been very popular are really no good because they're focusing on the wrong antibody. I mean, it is an antibody for the virus, but it's not the important one, and apparently it's one that can disappear very easily, etc. And then I actually called my doctor's office and I found out that sure enough, that was the one I had. Now again, probably I didn't have COVID, but can you imagine how much money has been made out of this test, which isn't doing what it's supposed to do in the midst of the worst public health crisis in a century? And I'm terrified, frankly, not personally, that the same thing is going to happen with the vaccine. That there's so much pressure to produce it and get it out there because there's so much money involved that we will wind up with something that isn't very good. But somehow they'll talk the regulators into doing it. Okay, any comments on all of that? Yes, Jude.
There's the famous case of the Qatar laboratory that made a batch of the Salk vaccine that gave a lot of kids polio, and a large handful were seriously debilitated from the vaccine. So you're right to worry.
Well,
and that was in the production, not the concept or anything else. It was that live vaccine was put in to the batch and not dead.
Yeah. Well, okay, Kevin, you were waiting for something when I started up.
Oh, yeah, I'll just make it real quick. Yeah, I think, I really appreciate everybody's insights here. It's helping me a lot to put some of this in place. But like Judy was saying, I don't have any background in this kind of stuff, so it's hard for me to understand unless I'm in a bubble bath with champagne. But I do think that it reminds me a lot of an aircraft investigation, an accident investigation. There's a chain of things that they all have to be in place at the same time for the accident to occur. Any one of which, if you pulled out of that chain, would stop it, would break that, and the accident would not have occurred. And so I see your point that, that there is a satisfaction in finding finding that thread, finding that chain of events. And yet at the end of it, a lot of people die. And, so I think the satisfaction of sorting out the puzzle is one thing. And then seeing these characters, even the good guys are in it to make money. And,
yes.
So that's hard for me.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Yes, Susan.
I guess in sort of in response to that and along the same lines, I guess what I find myself being wondering or questioning is the fact that they discovered that there was these mortgage bonds were going to implode, and the impulse was not to try to save the poor people who hold the mortgages. I mean the people to whom the mortgages had been given, or to help them because they were going to default on them. But the impulse was just, okay, how can we make money on this? We've got sort of this. It's not secret information. It's just that they happen to, dig hard enough to come up with it. And I guess that's the thing that bothers me more than anything else. It is the lack of, and it comes back to, the sort of what we were saying about the young woman, who had no empathy at all for the people being fired. And there was no concern at all for, although I guess there's that one scene on the steps of the, where was it? The stock exchange, where he sees people going by and he says, these are the people who are gonna, be hit by all of this. But that, anyway, you get what I'm trying to say. That's the part that bothers me.
Well, it's clear, though, that if they had, for instance, tried to go to some regulators, that would not have had any effect on what was going on.
Well, I don't know why is that clear?
Because they were all caught up in it too, until things fell apart.
Okay, but maybe who there has to be somebody in the regulatory world who would have listened. I mean, we are seeing a little slice of it. You know what I'm saying? That I mean, even if they, it didn't even seem to be part of the equation. That's all.
Okay, Janie, Judy.
Yeah, I was gonna say the lack of being motivated by the common good. And obviously in the end, the guys, they still made a lot of money, and it was like, as long as you make a lot of money, well, okay. But the question of sort of the Gen X trait of, every person for themselves. Yeah, we figured this thing out. We're not really motivated by the hippie common good. But I guess the question of the millennials, will they in fact, as a group, be more motivated to take a look at what is the common good, and don't we need to go back to a time or a place when the cohesiveness of society and caring about what happens to all the folks really is important for society to survive? Does the arc of history really eventually bend towards what is moral and right? One hopes.
That's what we'll have to spend a lot of time talking about next week.
Right.
Okay. Judy, yeah.
I don't want to keep hammering banks, but I want to point out the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl and mortgages. But there was a very good PBS or NPR podcast about the housing collapse. And it wasn't just the banks. It was all the way down. It was all the people. And there was one guy in there who was selling houses and mortgages to people who couldn't afford them, who would never be able to afford them. So it was systemic throughout the society, and the banks were, they were the top, and then all these people and the builders and the contractors and the mortgage brokers were all in it.
Yeah, by the way, the New Yorker just ran a long profile about Steve Mnuchin, who was totally in the middle of this stuff while it was going on. Tamara.
Well, I could botch this story. I'll try not to. A friend of mine who was a lawyer who represented people in the rent-to-own business, which is I don't know if you guys know about that, but poor people get caught spending all sorts of money to buy their couch monthly and end up losing it and losing all sorts of money doing that. It's really exploiting the same people who are exploited in these subprime mortgages. And this is the part I'll botch. I don't remember exactly what group in the administration at the time he went to talk to say to them, you are doing a huge disservice to these people. They will not be able to sustain these mortgages. They are going to go down. And these high officials he was talking to just ignored him and his cohorts who were there, trying to warn them. And, I think about that, and I think about, I think, Jude, you were the one who mentioned earlier the bailouts, and nothing done to protect all these people who sold their houses. No consequence to the people who sold them those mortgages. And that's really a travesty, and probably one of the reasons we got Trump.
Netflix has this series of documentaries called Dirty Money, which are very good, and one of them is about payday loans, which is another huge scandal. Yeah. Kevin, yes.
Yeah, just real quick, and to what Tomer was saying, I think it even goes deeper and worse than that, is that not only wasn't anybody prosecuted to speak of,
yeah,
but the blame was shifted to the people who had actually taken out the loans, who had taken out the mortgages. You know, the blame was shifted, as you saw in the, you know, with the two, predatory guys that they were interviewing in Florida. You know, okay, we'll blame it on the immigrants. We'll blame it on whoever. You know, the stripper shouldn't have 5 houses. That's her problem. That's her fault. You know that. So basically, shifting the blame away from the people really responsible for setting up the system. And I do agree that I think that's how we got where we are today politically. People buy that.
Yes, I think that's true. Okay, Jude.
To bring it back to the prophecy, it's interesting that if you look at your chart of the ages and dates of the youngest GIs at the time of enlistment, 1941, were 17, and the youngest millennials, even though they only have 14 years to be a millennial, don't forget that it's from like 82 to 96.
It looks that way now, yeah.
They're already 24. So, you know, the young person can have the fervor when somebody else down the street signs up for World War II to sign up too, no matter how dire the consequences might be, like Homer from Best Years of Our Lives. You know, he came home with some pretty dire consequences. He did win Best Supporting Actor, in perhaps the greatest upset of all time, but he still had a lifetime of challenges. And the question is, are the millennials now at minimum 24 going to be the generation that stands up to the sins of their fathers and grandfathers? And, you know, how can it be that they are, unless we adjust their end date forward?
Okay, well, that is a big topic for next week. And in fact, I had planned to start talking about those last chapters of The Fourth Turning and what predictions came true and what predictions did not come true. And I marked that, but we can certainly save that for next week. Again, looking ahead and looking back, the course always has 2 goals. One is to become familiar, partly with the help of the movies, with generational archetypes and the characteristics of particular generations. The other is to understand turnings and what's happened to the country in various periods and where we are now. And we'll be doing both of those things again next week. Certainly, the crisis as they anticipated did not take place, although equally certainly, we certainly are in a crisis. I did want to mention one thing, because Susan at the time of Wall Street mentioned that the portrayal of the Wall Street workforce at the time was not very diverse at all, which certainly it wasn't, and that was probably accurate. Now in this movie, there is a lot of diversity, and that's undoubtedly a good thing, that everybody should have these opportunities, but it didn't do anything for the groupthink. So, you know, while it may be a good thing, it doesn't solve all our problems. But I guess that's about all I have for now. And I will try to post some more specific outline for next week. And tomorrow I will post the last movie, which isn't going to be a recent movie, but it's a movie that I've used to wind up the course. And it's a movie about the 3 archetypes that we all belong to. And that makes it very worthwhile in any event, I think.
And you won't tell us now what it is?
No. Just wait until tomorrow morning. Okay.
I won't sleep tonight.
No, you will. Don't worry. I'm sure you've seen it, Susan. But you'll see it with new eyes this time. Okay. Okay, anything else?
David, this was a really great discussion.
It was indeed. And thank you all for that. Right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
See you all next week.
Right.